So if you're watching this live, then just give me a thumbs up or say hello, tell me who you are. If you are watching this on a replay, if you could just pop replay in the comments box so that I know who's watching it. From my perspective, it's really useful to know if these are useful. If they're not useful for you, then I'll stop doing them. So I want to just get a little bit of feedback so I just know who's watching, who's enjoying, what you're getting out of it, if anything, what's working for you, because I'm here to help you. So I really would value your feedback if you get a second. Okay, so we're going to keep it very simple today and go through some of the real fundamental basics of pelvic floor that I don't think people always know. We're leaving out the anatomy, we're leaving out the kind of, you can do this or you could do this or you could try that, and we're keeping it very, very straightforward, NHS guidelines kind of straightforward. And we're going to start with the two main issues that I see people struggling with pelvic floor. And the first one, which is probably the most common and probably the one that you are most aware of, is weakness in the pelvic floor. And weakness in the pelvic floor can show itself in a few different ways. You can find that you are struggling with incontinence. So that can show itself in a few different ways. It could be stress incontinence, which is probably the most common, the one where you leak when you laugh or when you sneeze or when you cough, usually catches you off guard, or when you run. I know loads of women
These not well.
I'm gonna make this work. So that's the second type. The third type is frequency incontinence, which is where you just are constantly needing to go all the time. It's fairly regular, fairly often, and you feel like your bladder just doesn't hold what it should hold. So that is frequency. And the problem with frequency is the more you give in to that frequent urge, the less able your bladder is to hold more liquid. So the more you give into it, you perpetuate the problem. So you need to, thanks Posey, I've just seen your note, I can't hear you, it's come back on. This happened a couple of weeks ago. It was absolutely fine on the recording and it seemed to be fine for most people, but okay, yeah, there was a lady a couple of weeks ago that said the same thing and I couldn't see because I was on my mat, so it was a bit tricky, but thank you Posey, I'm glad it's back on. So yes, so we've had stress when you're under pressure, urgency when is key in the door, and frequency where you are needing to go regularly. The other way that you might find that you have a weak pelvic floor, it might show itself. Prolapse is one, so heaviness, a feeling of something inside like a block or heaviness in the vagina. The other thing could be gas. If you can't control gas, you feel like you're always clenching, always having to hold. You can get bowel incontinence and urinary incontinence. So any of the previous things, stress, frequency, urgency, that can apply to front and back, bowel and bladder. And then finally, the other really common one that I see a lot is lower back pain. And this can just be because the pelvic floor acts as a support. It acts as part of your core muscle group. So if the pelvic floor isn't working efficiently, then the core isn't able to work efficiently. I'm doing this because it's like a cylinder, so I'm kind of, so the whole core is affected if the pelvic floor isn't working well. And that can have a real impact on your lower back. It can mean that your lower back has to take a lot of the strain. It takes a lot of wear and tear. So weakness in the pelvic floor is quite far-reaching in its consequences. If the core isn't working efficiently, yes, it can affect the lower back, and that's the one I see the most common. But also you get things like shoulder pain, neck pain, you get a lot of upper back tension because again, your body's holding you up like this because this area isn't able to work properly because one of the team players isn't pulling its weight. So that's weakness. Weakness in the pelvic floor is number one. Number two, the other way that you might be struggling with your pelvic floor is a tight pelvic floor. So the exact opposite. And this is something that people are less aware of. They're less inclined to know if they have this issue. And it can show itself in a few different ways. Frequency is one of them. So frequency is because your pelvic floor is so tight and it's always clenched, when you are going to the loo, you're not sufficiently letting go. So it means that you need to go more often because you're not completely emptying each time. So frequency can be a sign of both weak and tight, but it's probably more usual that it's a sign of tight. A really good example of this is like a nurse. So you have to hold your bladder for 5 hours. You can't possibly go to the toilet. You're too busy. You're on your feet. You're tight. You're busy. You know, you have to hold. So then when you do get to go, it's got to be really fast, really quick, get the job done, get out, get back to work. And this is something I see in people that have jobs that are standing, they're busy, they don't get a lot of breaks. And frequency can affect those people because they're not emptying sufficiently. So they feel like they need to go really regularly. And the thing with frequency, with the tight pelvic floor is that you struggle to let go. So that can have implications on constipation. So constipation can be a big sign of a tight pelvic floor. Pain when you let go, that feeling of not being able to quite relax in the pelvis. And that can be if you're going to the toilet, or even more commonly, it can be during intercourse. So that can be something that's really tricky, and that can be a way that a tight pelvic floor can show itself. Also vaginal examinations, that kind of thing, smear tests, that sort of stuff can be really painful if you've got a tight pelvic floor because you're really gripping, so that can be a big sign. And the other thing is hip pain, pelvic pain, tightness in the hips, lack of mobility there. Those things can be a sign of a tight pelvic floor as well. So what do we do about the pelvic floor, and how do we address a weak pelvic floor and a tight pelvic floor? So your basic guidelines are a 10-second hold in the engagement 10 times and 10 pulses. So we're going to go through those, and I'm going to talk you through how to do them effectively and how you can do them to cater for a weak and a tight pelvic floor. And this is where your breathing comes in. So if you want to sit back so that you're sitting back over your the back of your pelvis. So you're kind of leaning back, you're essentially slouching. You want to take a big inhale breath, and on that exhale, as you get rid of the air in the lungs, you're just going to have your hands on your tummy. And as you exhale, you're just going to feel the hands glide together as the tummy starts to draw in. And at the very end of that exhale, you'll feel the engagement low into the pelvic floor. You might not. If you don't worry about it. And then on your inhale, you just want to relax everything. So we would like, ideally, for the pelvic floor to be able to function independently from anything else, any other muscles, glutes, belly, shoulders. We want it to be really isolated. But this breath cycle, although it does bring in the belly, it does bring in the abdominals and the rest of the core, it's really useful way of finding your pelvic floor first. So if you're not sure where it is or how to get to it, that long exhale really helps. So at the very, very end of your exhale, that final drop of air, literally the last out breath when you can get nothing else out, that's when you start to feel pelvic floor. That's when you get low into that connection, and that's where your pelvic floor sits, really low into the pelvis. So we want to get that out breath to help us. So those breath cycles are going to be your way of finding the pelvic floor. And then your pelvic floor is really linked to your breath. So if you think of your diaphragm here and your pelvic floor here, as you breathe out and your diaphragm lifts, pelvic floor goes up too. As you breathe in and the diaphragm lowers, pelvic floor lowers too. So those two muscles work together. So using your breath is a really good way of not only engaging and getting the lift, but also releasing on your inhale. So people talk about not being able to find their pelvic floor, and that's usually because they're already lifted. So if that's you and you're in a tight category and you recognize any of those symptoms, if you're already lifted, you can't lift anymore. So you've got to work on your release. You've got to work on your relax. Now, if you scroll back, there's loads of stuff on this page about relaxing the pelvic floor, and there's loads of videos around opening the hips and finding space there and breathing into the pelvis and all the rest of it. And so I'm not going to go through the physical ways that you can release it today, but with your breath, you can do that. So exhale to engage, inhale to release. And you really want to try and make sure that on that inhale breath, you completely let go. You let go of the squeeze of the bum. You let go of the tummy. You let it come out. Let it pop. Let it flare. Who cares? On your exhale, you can start to recreate some connections there. But on your inhale, I want you just to really focus on letting go. So once you've found the pelvic floor and you've got a little bit of awareness going on there and you've figured out how to release, then you can start thinking about your recommended guideline engagements and what they consist of. So the first one is 10-second hold. So it's an exhale, it's a lift of the pelvic floor, and it's a hold for 10 seconds, and then it's a release. And then you're going to do that 10 times. Now, when you're doing your 10-second hold, if you get to a point where you are tense or squeezing your tummy or clenching your bum like this, or your shoulders are up around your ears, or you can feel any other tension other than pelvic floor, let go. Even if that only means you've got to 3 seconds or 4 seconds, you do the minimum required amount to focus and specifically access pelvic floor. Once you start bringing in other muscles, pelvic floor is probably not working anymore, or it's certainly not working efficiently. And we really want to be able to target it as its own independent muscle group. So if you start to feel those things, release. So 10 seconds is your guide. 10 seconds is your aim. It's not even a guide, it's something to get to. If you get to 3, then your aim is to get to 4. And your aim then is to get to 5. 10 is your ideal. I would say, personally, I'll probably get to 7. I reckon I can realistically, honestly, get to about 7 before I need to release. Now those 10-second holds, 10 of them, you need to do those 3 times a day. So that's quite a lot. That's probably, I say it's a lot, it's like 6 minutes of your day. But each time it's going to take you a couple of minutes, and you need to be focused. We talk a lot about including pelvic floor into movement, and that's all really valid, but that also needs to be done on its own. So yes, we want to include it in our squats, and we want to include it in our abdominal work, and we want to keep it functional so that it incorporates and helps us in our day-to-day life. But we also need to isolate it, like any muscle. If you want to grow the muscle, strengthen the muscle, you need to isolate it. So making sure that you do those 3 times a day, ideally. So find a couple of ways that you can fit them in. People talk about doing them when you're brushing your teeth, or doing them when you're sitting in traffic lights. Traffic lights is a good one because of the positioning, sitting back. But what I would say is try and make sure that you do them in a variety of different positions. So there's no sense in having a pelvic floor that's only strong when you're sitting down and you're leaning back. You need to be all fours, lying on your back, lying on your side, standing, walking. Try and mix it up a bit. Then you've got your 10 pulses, which are much quicker. This is like labour breathing. This is a remember the puffing out the candles? So this is like that. So you want to get those quick lifts, quick lifts, quick lifts. If your issue is tightness, focus on the lift. On weakness, focus on the lift. If your issue is weakness, focus on the release. It doesn't have to be, it can be, okay? okay? Take your time. Don't feel like you have to rush that. And again, you should be doing those 3 times a day. So probably all in all, you're looking at about 10 minutes a day. Now, we want to think about accessing the pelvic floor and the best way to do that. And recent advice, guidelines suggest that the best way to access your pelvic floor is lifting through the back passage, not the front. So why I say to lean back to find it to start with is because you're resting on the back passage. So you've got more nerve endings there, you've got more awareness of the feeling there. So when you lift up, it's like you're trying to stop wind. It's that feeling. But what I want you to think of is less is more. Again, once you get to 100% lift, you're going to be here. I want you to think 30%. I want you to think, am I trying too hard? Not can I do more? Am I trying too hard? Am I taking this into other areas? Am I over clenching? Making sure that 30% lift is in the back passage and then releasing it entirely. So completely letting go. Work on 3 times a day for all of those. And remember that to see a difference, you're looking at probably about 3 months. So this is probably the most common thing I hear or I'm told or I see with clients is, I've been doing Pilates for a year and I haven't noticed any difference to my pelvic floor. Actually, I very rarely hear that. Normally I hear the opposite. I don't know why I'm saying that. But I do hear that, and I have heard that my pelvic floor is still a problem. Or I still have to wear a pad if I run, or I have to, whatever. These are the exercises you need to do to correct a problem. So everyone should be doing these, everybody, whether you have an issue or not, you should try and do them at least once a day. But if you have a problem, if you have something that is affecting your life, if you are incontinent in any of the ways I've listed, if you've got back pain, if you've got a really bad abdominal connection, your core strength is rubbish, if you've got hip pain, painful sex, you can't let go, you constantly go into the toilet, any of those things, you need to be doing these 3 times a day, and you need to do it for a minimum of 3 months to notice any change. So I hope that's useful. Pilates will really help you in the functional sense, but you need to work on the strengthening of the muscle first. So you've got to be able to find the muscle. It's no use doing a Pilates class and expecting it to help your pelvic floor if you're not using your pelvic floor in that class. So your 3 times a day is the way to find it, first of all. Get those connections, really get them strong, work out the letting go, work out the release, and then incorporate it into your exercise. That's where Pilates comes in, any exercise actually. It comes in really useful, because then you can start incorporating it as part of a part of the core, a functional team player, something that can really start to support you, not only in mobility and in movement, but also in aesthetics. A lifted pelvic floor really helps with this lower abdominal shape. It can really help to pull your tummy in and give you a flatter abdomen. So it's kind of far-reaching. So I really hope this has been useful. If you have any questions, please let me know. I really love this as a topic. It really fascinates me, and I think that there's a whole lot we can do around it. And the thing about pelvic floor is, like I say, it's so important, but it's a muscle that we really don't rely on enough. We should be using it far more than we are. And we try and incorporate it into our classes, but like I say, this kind of specific work needs to be done first. So I see so many women whose lives are altered by a pelvic floor that isn't functioning properly. And like I say, there is always a case for surgery, and there's always going to be cases that can't be helped. But even if you have surgery, you've then got to do your pelvic floor exercises. So knowing this stuff, it's really invaluable. This is for everybody, men and women, but I'm talking to women at the moment. For women, you cannot not do your pelvic floor exercises, because it'll catch up with you. So any questions, let me know. DM me if it's sensitive, pop it in the comments if not. And please let me know what was useful. Pop it in the comments if you could. What was useful? What's going to be useful for you? What are you going to do going forwards? What changes might you make? And if you're watching this on the replay, exactly the same thing. Just pop replay in the comments and how you found this and what's useful for you. Thank you guys. Lovely to virtually see you again. And take care. Have a great rest of your week. See you soon.